4 years ago, we hosted you in Rome, at NatCon Rome in 2020, just a week before coronavirus. At the time, you were conducting a conversation with my close friend and colleague, Chris DeMuth, who couldn't make it to this conference and sends his regards. But I remember very well that at the time, 4 years ago, Chris asked you, he said, look, the National Conservative Movement, it's lacking in powerful leadership, and perhaps it's Hungary's time to take the leadership, to be an example to this movement in many other countries. And I remember very well that you said, look, Hungary is a small country at the edge of Europe, and leadership in such a big enterprise will have to come from France or Britain or from Italy, from some major country. In the meantime, it seems as though Hungary has actually stepped forward. There are magazines and conferences and think tanks sprouting up both in Hungary and elsewhere. And you've been supporting it. It's actually very unusual for a conservative prime minister to take an interest in these things. Has something changed?
In many senses, yes, it has changed, but the answer I have given at that time is still valid. So I think that if you are speaking about a conservative political movement, we need the proper sized country to lead it, politically speaking. And happily enough, now we have some chances. Italians, they have a conservative government, they have a conservative, highly reputed prime minister, so they should lead politically. Or French are in good shape. Marine Le Pen is just on the way back or up to the sky. So France probably should lead politically that kind of pan-European conservative movement. But on the other side, the question is more than reasonable because Hungary is far more active now in the international arena than we were. And there are three reasons for that. The first is that using the pandemia as an occasion, the bureaucrats in Brussels tried to suffocate Hungary financially. Probably not many of you followed that, but they created a new financial system, which is a perfect instrument to blackmail countries who do not behaving well on ideological sense. And therefore, countries like Hungary and Poland before were literally blackmailed financially to give up our policy on migration, on gender, on traditional values, and so on. That's a huge change. So it's an attempt to suffocate Hungary and Poland previously financially. So we have to react on that. If you are attacked internationally that high level, you have to be more active. That's one of the reasons why Hungary is more active internationally than we were previously. The second is that something bad is going on here in Brussels and in the European Union. During the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen, the whole political commission became more and more politicized. And they started to behave not as guardian of the treaty, but as a political actor. And you know, that brings the European Union at the verge of freedom and oppression, like the yesterday's story exactly exemplified where we are. So we have to fight for freedom more in Europe. So that's make us more active. And the third one is that there are some news from Western countries of an everyday suppression. That if a normal worker in his working location just make a remark about anti-migration, anti-gender, against the war, he can lose very easily his job. It's not a high-level political discussion. It's an everyday, you know, we use the term everyday fascism, everyday communism. It's an everyday oppression, which is growing in many countries of European Union. So those who fight for freedom or fought for freedom as we did, you know, we have to be active again. So what was our decision? This is the case. we should create a kind of conservative civic society for all the conservatives who would like to fight for freedom. And Hungary is a proper place for that. Because very difficult to define what's going on in Hungary, you know. Leftists try to do it in a very ugly way to define what the hell is going on in Hungary, but we can say one thing surely, that if you look at Europe today, it's a kind of progressive liberal ocean. And that is an island, a country which does differently. So Hungary is the island of difference at this moment in Europe, which is a proper place for the conservatives to come, speak freely, to discuss, and probably plan some common political action for the future. So this is the change. So self-defense, danger of democracy, danger of freedom, and a good example of Hungary, which can be helpful to create a kind of conservative civic society, if it is intellectually not too controversial.
All right, very good. So we are, at this point, less than 2 months away from European elections, from elections to the European Parliament. And we're just recently got to see, you could almost say, a change in regime in Poland, which I think has many people worried. Could you tell us how you see this election campaign in which you are deeply involved? What are the key issues that conservatives and nationalists should be looking out for in this political campaign? What is at stake? What are the key issues?
Okay, first let's clarify the job. So I'm a doer. I'm not a man to provide intellectual ideas. That's your job, probably. So my job is just to do the political decisions. And if I approach this question of the election from that point, the sense of this European election is change the leadership. What is election for? The sense of election is that if the leadership proves to be bad, must be replaced. That's so simple. And this leadership of European Union is simply bad. It's failed. So it's not just a political statement, it's very much factual. So it's a leadership as in every country. They selected certain issues in the last 5 years, and they promised that they will manage that issues. Let's say, green transition. Green transition is failed. Not properly engineered, so they have to recalculate again. Agriculture, they promised a better agriculture, and now the farmer community is suffering all around Europe. They said competitiveness will be improved in these 5 years. The competitiveness of Europe is declining. They said that they will stop and manage somehow the migration crisis. Migration crisis is bigger than earlier. Then they said that they will introduce some sanctions to stop the war, Ukrainian-Russian war. The war is going on. So if a leadership promising something, let's say 5 or 6 important points for the community, and fail to deliver, they have to leave, go away. We need new leadership. That's the sense of election, politically speaking. Intellectually, it's a different issue. It's more complicated to find more conservative approach to the European institution and to find leaders who behave more, who deliver more respect to the national governments and to the nations of Europe. Don't neglect them as it was done in the last 5 years.
Okay. Hello. If I've been assigned the job of the intellectual here in this conversation, so let me ask you an intellectual question. We have, I hope it's not too intellectual. We have a debate among political theorists and scholars about what the best way to describe this new movement on the right is. And as you know, I think it's best described as nationalism, the defense of the idea of the independent national state. But there are many scholars and many journalists and even people who are active in our movement who prefer to use the word populism. I was wondering, what is your view of the use of the term populism? I think that you avoid it. Why?
First, may I have a remark on nationalism?
Yes.
Okay.
Of course.
So that in our language, in our culture, nationalism has a positive sense and positive meaning. But in West, it's not the case. Because in the West, and especially in Germany, they have an understanding of their political history that all the major crimes and bad things, catastrophe in their history was created by national level. And the international level was the solution. Look at like Nazism, yeah? In Central Europe, it's just the opposite. In our history, all problem was created by international communities, and the good answer was national reply, you know? So therefore, in our mind, nationalism is a solution, is a good answer, and a kind of good resistance against the empires in order to save your sovereignty, independence, and so on. So, but at the same time, the international arena, especially because of the overwhelming impact of liberal press, if you say nationalism, you are a dead man. Because nationalism, liberal interpretation, is the neighbor of fascism and feudalism, so awful things. So therefore, we created a kind of replacement of national patriotism and all that kind, which is intellectually crazy anyway. So the proper definition is national. Okay, on populism, you know, I'm an old man, an old fox in the job, and I remember how was the intellectual level of the political discussions, let's say 30 years ago. Having discussion with Helmut Kohl, Jacques Chirac, even Tony Blair, you know. So the intellectual content, substance of the political discussions 20, 30 years ago was not like today, you know. Today, everything is about a kind of fight of language. It does not matter what is the substance, because it has a political meaning of certain categories, and you are bombed, you know, you are bombed. And populism is that kind of negative stigma which they use against you if the liberals don't like you. But if we try to be serious, what is populism about? Because originally it has a sense. It was not as publicly used as today. Populism was a well-known category saying that there are candidates for leadership who promising nice and good things, being aware that if they are in power, they will not be able to fulfill them. They will not be able to deliver. That was populism. But to be accused as a Hungarian prime minister is ridiculous. Because I promised popular things and I delivered all. That's not populism, that's politics, you know. So public security, I promised public security because there was a mess. Now there's a public security. I promised that 1 million more jobs will be created. It's done. I said that we will defend the families against gender propaganda. We did. We promised that we will stop the migration. We stopped, and so on and so on. It's not populism, it's politics. It's leadership, what we are doing.
As a young man, you lived under communism, and I think you heard, I heard you mention that some of the things that we're seeing now are remind you a little bit of communism. Is if you think about this seriously, is it true? We thought we defeated the Marxists with the fall of the Berlin Wall. Do you think it's coming back? Is there something to that?
Okay. How was the end of the communism? That was one of the nicest periods of my life. To push down the communists and push the Soviet Union out of the country. That was really a joy. How did it happen? So, like just yesterday here, we established Fidesz in '88 as an anti-communist young political organization. And we started to organize meetings. And, you know, it was in the second part of the 80s, '88, so it was obvious that it's not as a harsh dictatorship as it was earlier. So some movement has a chance to survive, not that we were not imprisoned and so on, but they did everything not to happen, the free expression of our opinion. So we rented a place in Budapest, and just several hours prior to the meeting, it was said that, unfortunately, it's not available anymore. And then we looked for another one, and they said that if the runner of the place would supply us with some beer and some food, he will be out of the business, you know. So the same kind of pressure technologies which you have experienced here was very common in the second part of the 80s in Hungary. But finally, we won. So I think the problem is probably intellectually, Professor, that political leaders discussing too much on political systems, democracy, authoritarian, mix, blah, blah, blah. But the main question is freedom. Whatever you characterize a political system, the question is oppression versus freedom. And I think freedom in Europe, and especially in Brussels, is in danger. As just yesterday, it was shown. So, whether you call it communism or not, we are living in the verge of freedom and oppression in Europe, in the Western civilization. And we have to fight for the freedom. So that's what I can say, that those who love freedom must be united and fought against the forces of oppression, ideologically, politically, the legal system, and so on and so on. So freedom is a serious fight now in Europe again.
Is this election an election about oppression? Or is that an exaggeration?
No, it's an exaggeration in a sense because the elections will happen at national level. And the nations are in different shapes. So in some countries, it's about freedom as well. But in other countries, it's not. So because we are different.
Okay, let's move to some of these larger issues. I think we can't have a conversation about politics in Europe today without talking about immigration.
Yeah.
And I think everybody would benefit from hearing your views. I mean, I'm sure you read the media as well as everybody else does. And there's a tendency to accuse you of, xenophobic, of hatred of foreigners. That's, obviously Hungary has no foreigners because you hate them. What's your actual view of immigration?
Okay, first, just to clarify the position of Hungary on migration. It's true that the number of migrants in Hungary is 0. And the reason is very simple. We have a system which is a fair system. We say that the border is a border. And to cross the border illegally, it's an illegal action. So we can't accept that somebody illegally crossing the borderline. It's a crime. It's not a human right something. It's a crime. So therefore, we treat everybody who is doing that as a crime maker. So that's the first. The second is, we understand that many people would like to come, let's say, in Hungary. But there is a procedure of that. If you would like to come to Hungary, first you have to pass your request to the Hungarian authorities, let's say in an embassy, let's say in Belgrade, which is the neighboring country capital, and then stay and wait. So nobody can step into the territory of Hungary prior to get the final decision of the Hungarian authorities whether you let you come in or you can't. So you have to wait outside. This is the key issue. And this is the red line. If you are not able to manage that all around Europe, all national authorities to manage the same regulation, that those who would like to come to Europe must stay out and waiting for the answer of the authorities to their request, they can't move earlier than that. So if we are able to manage that, migration is over immediately. This is the solution. That was done by us. In 2016, we created the fence, the border guards, and that kind of legal regulation. Okay, now let's say something about more philosophically on migration. Because migration now is about civilizations as well. Because whether we say or not, the fact is that we have a Christian tradition continent. It's difficult to say whether we are Christian still or not, but it's a civilization based on Christian roots and traditions. And those who are coming, they are not. They are coming from the Muslim civilization. Okay, so that's raised plenty of complicated questions. And as I mentioned, it's not my job to answer to that, it's your job. But there is one horizon of that question which probably belongs to the doers. And that's lead us to the core, to the heart of conservative thinking. Many definitions exist also, but as a doer, I use conservatism, the leaders or the persons or the way of thinking of whom time horizon is high or long. So I have some grandkids. By calculation, reasonable calculation, in 2100 they will live. So as a grandfather, I am very much interested in the question, what kind of country Hungary will look like in 2100? And I feel some responsibility not to do something which will be bad for the grandkids, not now, but in 2010, or to do everything now which could be helpful to have a good life for them, yeah? So migration has that kind of historical horizon. What kind of civilization Europe will look like? It will be a Muslim civilization, a Christian one, or a mixed something, or what kind of life it will look like? And what I can say that to live in a Christian society, even it's not as strong as it was, but to live in a Christian society is an amazing thing. The best thing I can imagine to my kids and my grandkids. So why we should give it up? Just in a way to let different kind of people to change the cultural character of this continent. I have nothing against the Muslims. Islam is a great civilization. If you go there, I just was 1 week ago in Morocco. That's fantastic. What they have done, not having barbarism, but creating a civilization, is a big thing, in the geo circumstances where they live. So they created culture, whatsoever. It's nice there, but don't bring it into and to change if the majority of the society on a democratic basis don't like it. Because I think that nations has the right to decide about their own future. So if somebody would like to make an attempt to create a mixed society, Christian-based with Muslim communities, and as liberals think the outcome will be something good, let's do it. It's your fate, it's your future, but don't force us to do so. So that's what we call the offer of tolerance, what I have made several times to Brussels. I said, guys, you can create whatever migration system you would like to do, but don't force Hungary to do the same thing, because we simply don't believe. We think that mixture of the two civilizations will be not resulted in good things. Public security gone away, the intellectual horizon is totally confused, the value system of societies will be not strong enough to help us to live in a good way. So don't force us to do that. And we organized in Hungary a referendum. So what I'm speaking about is not my personal opinion only. It's not interesting anyway. But the Hungarian society, the only one in Europe, who got a chance to express his own opinion in a referendum, they voted against that. They said that we have to defend the border, we would not like to have a mixed civilization, we would like to control the border crossings, we would like to maintain the Christian traditions of our society. So we have a public decision of our community, how we would like to organize our life. Probably we are not right. But who can say that we are not right? It's our decision. We took the consequences. That's the way. Let us do our lives on a national basis as we wish so. So that's our position on migration. It's not just about migration. It's about public order, civilization, and the sovereignty of the nations to decide how they would like to react on this modern phenomena of mass migration. That's the Hungarian position. So, sorry to be too long, but it's a complicated issue.
Is that an appropriate policy or philosophy for all of Europe?
I don't think so. My position was always very simple. Don't create common asylum policy. We have the Geneva Convention about the asylum system, which is accepted not just in Europe but everywhere in the world. That's good and that's enough. We don't need common migration policy of European Union. This issue belongs to the nations. That's my point. It's not very much popular because some countries who already let millions of migrants to come to their countries, they would like to get rid of them, to be very clear. And the way to get rid of them, to distribute them to those where they don't have. It's not fair. So do your job on your national basis. Defend your nation. If you need help, Hungary is ready to help. But it's your nation. You can't You can't hide your interest behind the so-called European refugee system. Come on. It's about the nations who reject the migration. This is the fact.
You know, if we're already talking about it, I simply have to insert a note of thanks. As you know, we were moving from one venue to another under pressure from leftist politicians. This is our third venue, and we found a home here thanks to the graciousness of a Tunisian Muslim family that owns the hall. And I have to say, I was with the owner in interviews with the media yesterday, and you know, he probably thinks his job is to be a businessman, but you know, he might end up being prime minister. He's so eloquent in speaking to, you know, he says, look, if we don't tolerate one another, we're going to set the whole country on fire. We have to tolerate one another. We have to allow space for one another. It was really a remarkable performance. I wanted to thank him. I wanted to give you an opportunity to do so as well.
So thank you very much. So what we are speaking about is not a kind of rational character of certain people. This is not the issue, even not with the migration. Because in Hungary also we have entrepreneurs coming from Muslim countries doing very well, from Turkey and so on. So we have no problem with that, but migration is not that issue. Migration is about the right of a community to decide with whom they would like to live with. That's all. So thank you very much for the Tunisian friends, and I think it was a good decision to let you come into Belgium. It's a good decision.
You hesitated when you said Christianity. Is there a role for Christianity in Europe today? I know that that Hungary is, you know, many people in the West look to Hungary as an example of a country in which public Christianity has been taking steps forward. But I was surprised to find out when I visited Budapest on one of my visits that weekly church attendance in church in Hungary is, you know, something like 10%. It's in many ways also a post-Christian country. What role does Christianity play, in your view, in the public life of Hungary and of Europe and Western nations more generally?
Okay. So we Hungarians are in trouble because the orientation of the people to the eternal questions of the life is diminishing. So we are more living on the everyday level, and possibilities and motivation to think in a more abstract way about our life, to be born, die, families. So, you know, eternal questions. It's to be discussed. The level of discussion is very much down, not in the public life, and the church is unfortunately not strong enough at all. Exactly as you have said. But, you know, to be Christian was always very difficult, you know, because original meaning to be Christian means that you follow the teaching of Jesus. And, you know, it's very difficult. Even in the previous times, but today it's even more difficult because the temptations are far higher and far many than it was earlier. So the temptation not to follow the teaching of Jesus is probably the highest ever in the European history. So very difficult. And I understand that if the churches are not doing better, if the prophets are not coming, you know, if the professors are not speaking on philosophical issues, if the local communities are not ready to open their heart to that questions, you know, we will lose Christianity as such. So that's one level of the problem. So we are in a trouble. On the other side, there is another interpretation of Christianity, not as the teaching of Jesus Christ in your personal life and to follow it, but about as a cultural heritage. And on that basis, the state and the public will can do a lot. In Hungary, for example, it is written into the constitution that the public authorities must do everything to maintain the Christian values of our societies. Whatever does it mean? It's a serious discussion. What does it mean exactly? How to do it? But the intention is very clear that we have a tradition which we would like to maintain, and the state has a role to maintain it through their institutions. We can't force the people to follow certain religious convictions, but we can insist on that the spiritual content of education or the treatment in the hospital must have some basic values which strongly related to the cultural tradition, to Christian cultural tradition. So we try to do something like that. Strangely enough, when the Hungarian people get less and less religious, they support more and more Christian values. I'm surprised of that anyway, but this is the social phenomenon which is going on. I don't know exactly why, probably because of migration, probably because of the suppression coming from Brussels, liberal ocean of, occupying everything. But the intention of the people to maintain something they call Christian cultural tradition is very strong, and the level of personal belief is decreasing. That's the dilemma we are living in.
We know that Europe is, like most Western countries, Europe faces a demographic crisis. In part, the argument for a mass immigration, from the direction of the economists, is looking at the future of a depopulating Europe. Your country is well known, at least in conservative circles, for experimenting with efforts to alter the demographic direction, which is especially necessary if immigration is going to remain low. Can you tell us, do you believe in this? What is your experience? Is it working, or is it just a mirage?
May I introduce here my conspiracy theory as well, which is behind the migration. So the fact is that those who are saying that our continent is aging and nations are aging is true. But each nation has the possibility to find the answer how to react on that. So the answer cannot be a centrally forced migration policy, definitely cannot be. So it's not an answer, not an acceptable way to find an answer, because that's belong to find an answer to each community, which means each nation, each country, individually. So what Hungarians are doing, we try to support families first. We spend huge amount of money in a very polite and moderate way to convince the young generation that family is a good thing. It's very complicated anyway, because it could easily become a freedom issue. And not proper distinction between those who would like to have kids and those who would not like to get. So it's a complicated issue, but in Hungary find a way in the last 10 years to build up a strong family supporting system, financially and legally as well. So that's first. Second, of course, in Hungary, it's obvious that we're lacking of workers every year around. This year it is 65,000. So every year, the economic ministry publishes a figure saying that this year has no Hungarian people to work at 65, 30, so certain number of jobs. And we allow guest workers to have that job, only that job and only guest workers. And we copied the Qataris regulation, basically, anyway. A little bit modernized, but it's a Qataris regulation. Guest workers can stay 2 + 1 year, and then they have to leave. It's over. If they would like to come back, they have a chance to come back one more, another 3 years. Then they have to leave again. So they don't have the right to stay. We have to have that interruption, because the crazy, stupid European regulation says that if they stay continuously for a certain period, you can't push them out. But guest workers must leave, is to say, we don't need you anymore. So this is a right of the nation to say it. Because we provide not a home, we provide a job possibility. That's the deal. It's a contract. So I think it's fair. So that's how we're doing that. But in long term, no any other solution, only to raise the number of the kids who are born. 2.1% is the rate we have to reach. And now in Hungary we have 1.58, 1.6. But we started from 1.2. So the tendency is positive, but it's very difficult to raise because simply the young generation would not like to get more kids, which is a problem leading us against to the Christianity and related questions, spiritual life. So that's where we are living, and we hope that if we are able to continue for another 10 years, the pro-family policy, we can reach again 2.1 without migration. So that's what we are doing.
Okay, let me change the direction just a little bit.
Sorry, conspiracy theory. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
the conspiracy.
I'm
So
sorry.
because-
I didn't mean to prevent you from
No.
expressing a conspiracy theory.
No, because if not, if the real reason why in many countries the liberal supports migration is not demography, which is my point, it's just pretext. What is the real reason? The real reason that they are collecting voters. That's so simple. If you look at the European history, the European model, it's obvious that the political competition was between two major blocks of the political life. Those who remain the old traditional Christian framework, let's say Christian democracy conservatives, and the modern guys who left that background, that was the left liberal something. And the competition between the two camps resulted in creating governments, correcting each other, changing of governments. So altogether it was quite well managed. It was not a bad system. But what was the basis of that? The basis of that those who stayed in the Christian tradition is, by and large, are the same as those who left. If the numbers are different, that kind of horizon of the political competition disappear. And what the liberals and the leftists are doing, they recruit voters. They let the Muslim guys come in who will never vote for any Christian country, any Christian party. So now they are collecting new voters for the left. This is the real explanation. It's not about economy, it's not about democracy. It's just blah, blah, blah. The real reason is power. And because we are living in power, power means number of votes, and they're collecting votes. That's the reality as I see it. Sorry, that's what I call conspiracy theory, but I think it's close to reality.
I can't help noticing that almost every time somebody in the press writes that I'm going to be meeting with Prime Minister Orbán of Hungary, they always add Prime Minister Orbán of Hungary, comma, Putin's closest ally in Europe. It's as though it's your name.
My mother is not happy.
So, is there any truth in this? Do you regard yourself, does Hungary regard itself as an ally of Putin?
No, that's ally is a very strong and clear meaning expression. It's simply vague. But the question is reasonable. What is the relationship between Hungary and Russia, especially under this war which is going on? So it's a serious question. We have a very simple geopolitical strategy, which says that we would not like to have, again, common border with Russia. Because during the Soviet times, Soviet Union and Hungary has a common border. So we would not like to have it again. So therefore, we respect the international rights of Ukraine, sovereignty of Ukraine, and people to create their own and maintain their own state. So therefore, invasion of Putin against Ukraine is totally against the values of international relation and all the values we all respect. So no question of that. But the Hungarian point of interest is that something must be between Russia and Hungary. So this is the number one issue. So we support Ukraine to survive somehow, which is questioned because Ukraine is not anymore a sovereign state. Ukraine is now just protectorate of the West. So without getting the money and the weapons from the European Union and United States, Ukraine as a state would cease to exist. So it's not a sovereign state anymore, just to be very clear. But something must exist there anyway. That's the first point. Second, Hungary has always a good economic relation with Russia. So I would not like to give up that kind of cooperation, because the war between Ukraine and Russia is not the war of the Hungarians. It's a war of two Slavic nations. One big Slavic nation attacked another one, and they have a war. And we don't behave like the Europeans who said, oh, it's our war, because it's about values, it's about international order whatsoever, so we are in the war, it's our war, but not fully, because we would not like to die, you know. So please, Ukrainians, die. We give the money and give the weapon and defend our values, please. So it's not so much our war to go into and to take the life risks there to fight there, but just, you know, to finance your dying. So I don't like that approach at all. But at the same time, it's obvious that each nation, even the Ukrainians, has the right to decide whether they would like to fight and die for their freedom or not. So I don't criticize the Ukrainians why they have a war against Ukraine, because they defend their own country or nation. So it's their decision. The other question is whether they are doing it cleverly or not. But it's their job to answer, not mine. But my job as an outsider is only to define and understand what is the reason of the war. And the reason of the war is very simple. It's called NATO membership. And just as a country who was occupied by the Russians for 45 years, I can say on personal experiences that Russians will never allow to have membership of Ukraine as it is now in NATO. For the geopolitical thinking, it's impossible. They will always do everything to have something between the Russian border and NATO countries' border. It could be called Ukraine, it could be war zone, it could be called war, whatever. But a buffer zone must exist between NATO and Ukraine. Probably it's not a legitimate request on behalf of the Russians, because it's outside the territory of Russia. So probably it's illegitimate, but this is the fact. And if we don't answer to the question clearly, whether we would like to encourage Ukraine to join NATO or to say, guys, you have to understand that you are a buffer zone country. You can't change your house number. So create a reasonable policy which is adequate to the geographical position. So it's our option. Unfortunately, we are not doing to deliver evidences that ceasefire and negotiations would be better than continue to war. We're just delivering evidences to the Ukrainians that die more, fight more, and you will win. It's definitely true, they cannot win. Because it's not about the values, it's not about my heart, it's not about my philosophical conviction, it's about reality. So that war has no solution on the battleground. What is even more sad, it's easy to imagine a situation when the Ukrainians will not get a better peace after losing hundreds of thousands of people than they would have got without having the war, which raised many, many philosophical and spiritual and moral issues. So I think what we Europeans are doing is bad. It's not targeted on ceasefire, and we don't confront it seriously with all the consequences of supporting a country who is in a war which cannot be won. So that's a big bulk of the problem and difficulties concerning the war. So it's not about Putin ally. It's about the truth. It's about the reality.
I think we have time maybe for one more question. Since October 7th of last year, Israel has unfortunately, and the Middle East, pushed itself upon Europe and the West as a renewed issue. This last week we had the first ever Iranian attack directly from Iranian soil on Israel. The comedians in Israel, there's still comedians in Israel. The comedians in Israel said it's wonderful. It's the first time we have direct flights from Tehran since 1979. Have these historical events, have they changed your view of Israel, of Hungary, or Europe's relationship with Israel and the Middle East? And do you have any advice for Israelis and for Jews in these times?
I try to follow what's going on, and to be a Jew is not an easy thing, if I understand it. But it also belongs to you, not to me anyway. More to understand what does it mean, Jewish identity under these circumstances where your country is today. But probably it's not known to many that around 200,000 Hungarian Jews are living in Israel. And you know, the Hungarian citizenship regulation is based on origin, not on territory. So it means that we have potentially around 200,000 Hungarian citizens living in Israel. So what's going on there is not just a geopolitical issue for us, because in that connection, you know, our citizens are there. On the other side of the story, that it's also probably not known here, but probably the first or second biggest Jewish community in Europe is living in Budapest. So who are also involved into that conflict. So the Hungarian government, who's compulsory to defend all the interests of our citizens, so we have a close feeling and involvement into that. So that's the reason why Hungary and Israel has always a good relationship, state-to-state relationship, regardless that the leftist Jewish liberals everywhere in the world attacking as being anti-Semite anyway. But at the same time, we are the most committed country to support Israel, you know. So it's not a circumstance for the liberals to create some annoyment, you know. So they continue to say.
You know, the liberals cause problems even if they're Jewish.
I can imagine. So therefore, we Hungarians are touched by that issue, not just politically, but as I said, emotionally as well. So the Hungarian position is very simple. We condemned all the terrorist attack against Israel. Second, we think that the Jews have a state. And if you have a state, you have the right to defend it and to maintain your statehoodness. That's so simple. It means that you have to stop and to prevent everything which could be dangerous for your existence of statehoodness. So that's very simple. This is the line of our foreign policy. On the other hand, we have some fear in our mind that if the conflict in Middle East becoming not just a terrorist organization supported by Iran and others and Israel, but it will become a state against state conflict. The whole Middle East became a war zone again. And that could and will destabilize the European security as well. So therefore, we hope that the leaders are good enough to find a good answer. I know Bibi very well, back to 20 years. He is one of the most loyal friends to Hungary always. So I'm biased a little bit to his, not a little bit, I'm quite biased to his, I always supported him and so on. He's a great leader. Whatever critiques are going on in Israel, I try to fight, but he's a great leader. And I'm sure that he will be able to find a way to defend the sovereignty of his nation and not to create a war zone in Middle East. It depends on his wisdom. And by that way, wisdom coming from the God.
I think we're out of time. Thank you for this wonderful interview. It's great to see you again. I look forward to the next time.